Shout outs to her. I don't know why you do that, so. Okay. First things first, we have a lot to celebrate on this test. So I wanted to take a second to do that, and I just wanted to name a couple quick things. So I'll share you guys can see the broken down data already on ANET, but I'll share the spreadsheet of it. But one thing I just wanted to name is, we had 17 kids score over 60%, which was great, especially considering it's our first poem. And then on our questions that were context clues and then identifying the speaker, we had 63% and 68% correct answers, respectively, which is pretty impressive. And then the part B of those questions was also pretty high. So there's a lot to celebrate there. Are there any specific individual kid celebrations you guys want to celebrate? It might be worth thinking about who our Vogel students were.
I think for me, all of those besides Tanae, like especially Zion and Camille did really well.
Mm-hmm. The first person that popped into my head was Ramir, because he did very well just from the multiple choice. So if he would have actually tried a little bit harder with his written response, he would have had an even better score. Mm-hmm. But he's one of the highest scorers in terms of multiple choice consistently, knowing that he's like one of the lower step levels in the entire class.
Mm-hmm. And then he also got a shout out at the entire TFA banquet, right? Mm-hmm. Wasn't he your featured student?
Yep.
So it's good. He's famous outside the walls. All right, so we're gonna hop in today, and I did tweak the structure just a little bit. We're still gonna break down the standard like we normally do. We'll still go through teacher and student exemplars. But when we go to reteach, I'm actually gonna model the reteach directly for you, so I can model out some key points, especially since this is our first time with this standard. So the first thing that I want us to do is, we have our standard here. It's also posted up here. And we actually wanna break down standard 3.2 directly as it relates to poetry. So we talk a lot about different stories, fables, folktales, and myths, but students also need to determine the central message of a poem. So let's take a second and just script out what knowledge and skills do students need to master this standard as it relates to poetry. You guys have quite a lot down, and I feel like just looking over your paper, a lot of it matches mine, so let's hop into it. And as we share out, think about what are the things you're most confident on and feel like your language is really refined, going down to the things that feel most vague. So what do we want students to be able to do based on the standard?
Determine the literal meaning.
Right, so we know students need to determine the literal meaning. Okay.
Determine the deeper meaning.
Right, we want to get to the deeper meaning.
Understand how the key details contribute to the understanding of the central message.
Yep. So let's do there's two parts of that, right? So identify
Key details.
the key details. Explain how the key details contribute to the central message.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is the deeper meaning the central message? Or is the central message the literal meaning and the deeper meaning?
Good question. Let's hold that thought until we get into creating our exemplars. Is there anything else we want to name here?
I guess for some instances, if it isn't the central message determining the lesson learned.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm gonna hold off on using that language, lesson learned, for poetry, because I think on some poems that works, sometimes it doesn't work, so I think we wanna stick with the central message. But as we think about the deeper meaning in the central message, it can at times be a lesson learned. Right, because within this, within the poem that we used, it's not really like a lesson the author's teaching, you know what I mean? Okay, anything else we wanna add right now? Okay, cool. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create our teacher exemplar. So you have the poem on the next page. If you want to pull it off, you're more than welcome to. Let's just take a second and write out what is our exemplar response to the prompt that we asked students to respond to. As you craft your exemplar response, I'm actually less interested in the support today, so don't spend significant time on that. What I actually want to zoom in on is just what is the central message of this poem. Claire, you're the greenest banana, so why don't you go first?
I should put the central message of the poem is that shadows can be fun and can create adventures for everyone.
Interesting. David, what'd you put?
The central message is that shadows are everywhere and can be a source of fun, joy, and entertainment.
Interesting. So I put playing outside under the sun can be an exciting adventure and a great way to bond with friends. So where are we similar? Where are we different?
This idea of entertainment and joy.
Yep, we both have that.
I'm different. You don't have shadows.
Right. We both have exciting adventure. I think I used the sun versus shadows, but I think those are actually pretty similar in this case. So you could say playing outside with our shadows. Right. Okay. One piece that I had that was different than you all is this part about bonding with friends. Because the speaker is with a friend throughout. Okay. So in naming that central message of the poem, where do you see some of these skills coming through? And is there anything we want to add?
I guess there's like this, like, it's not like clearly stated, but it's getting at the literal meaning, at the deeper meaning. Like, yes, this person is like outside with shadows, and shadows are everywhere. Like, that's what the entire poem is about. But like, the deeper meaning is that like, it's actually like a shadow, which is like something that actually seems like pretty boring and lifeless, can actually be like super fun. And like you mentioned, like because of these shadows, this person is having a ton of fun outside with their friend.
Right. She's using that powerful image of like the images. She's using powerful imagery for of the shadows to create like a joyful and excited feeling. And so as we have part of that, we have the literal meaning, which is she's literally going outside and playing. And then outside and the deeper meaning is that there is like a fun adventure that's happening as a result of all these adventures outside. And last, there's like a deeper bond being formed with her friend through the shadows. So, Claire, do you think that answers your question a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it includes the literal and the deeper
Right.
meaning, but they're not having to it's like a summary of the literal meaning versus like.
Right, they're woven together within the, like, what is the author's message? What is the author trying to show me with this poem? Perfect. One thing that came up through there is when we think about the deeper meaning, we need to consider what is the feeling the author is creating. And how are they doing it? Those are two key components of making sure we get to the deeper meaning of the poem. Perfect. So there isn't the greatest student exemplar, but I pulled Zion Bells, who I thought did a nice job of including some of these things. Where do we see the knowledge and skills that we named in the standard, especially relating to the deeper meaning, showing up in her work? And then is there anything we want to add based on the work that she did? So one more time, where do we see the knowledge and skills showing up? Is there anything we want to add? Okay, first question. Where do we see some of the skills we named in Zion's response?
Like she has a clear understanding of like the literal and the deeper meaning of the poem. I felt like with the deeper meaning she could have gone even deeper, but like you could tell that like she understood that like they're outside playing, but they're like having a lot of fun with each other because they're playing with these shadows.
And I think she includes like how did the author create the feeling? They showed that they're making things with the shadows.
Right. The thing that stuck, so what we see is she clearly has a grasp of the literal meaning, right? They're outside playing with their shadows. What I think Zion did well in similar ways with our exemplar is she named the feelings that are evoked in the poem. So she talks about having fun with their shadows. She also, in her explanation of text evidence, says this shows that they are at the beach with their shadows. That's literal, and then that they were having a good time, which I think is it gets towards the deeper meaning. Okay, so with that in mind, we know what we're looking for, right? We're looking for to make sure students have a grasp of the literal meaning. Then we're making sure that they have a grasp of the deeper meaning, especially what emotions was the author evoking. With that in mind, let's go ahead and take a second and look at our exemplar response, or our level 2 responses. I pulled 4 students from each class. They're on the very back. As you read through the 4 students from your class, think about where are students showing their knowledge and skills, and then where's the gap? One more time, where are they showing the knowledge and skills we named, and then where's the gap? to name your gap. And as you think about the gap again, we're just zooming in on that central message part, less about the support for today. Okay, let's hear where you all are at.
I think that all of them, with the exception of Camille, who kind of got up the deeper meaning, it's like very literal, taking what they did in each stanza. And so they're missing the deeper meaning, so the emotions that the shadows evoke for the narrator.
Yeah, same. Aside from the like support, there was evidence, like all of them chose good text evidence, all of them like clearly understood the literal meaning, and there's like a presence of the deeper meaning in each and every one of their answers, but Jakaya was the only one who like got it, the feelings, like it was joyful, it was fun, it was exciting, versus everyone else was just like, they like shadows, they like shadows, they like shadows.
I completely agree. And so, on your next page, there's a place to write this down. When we think about what our gap is right now for RL32, especially as it relates to poetry, it's this. Oh man, I thought I was so fancy with my chart paper, but it's like falling down all over the place. Okay. Alright. So students are naming the literal meaning, but are not using the powerful images and the feelings they create to identify the deeper meaning.
I got it.
Alright, so on the bottom of this is key points, but today we're gonna do this just a little bit differently and take some feedback from some informal conversations I've had with you all and the 4th grade teachers. And what I'm gonna do just a little bit differently is, instead of having you all plan the model, I'm actually gonna plan the model. And what I'm gonna ask you to do is, I'm gonna ask you to pull out the key points of them, okay? So as you watch, think about what are the key points, what am I doing to reteach this gap? And again, the gap we want to hit is that students are not using the powerful images in a poem and the emotions that they create to determine the deeper meaning. Okay, so I'm going to hop into my model. All right, so scholars, today we're going to take our understanding of poetry to the next level, to the
Next level.
perfect. And we're going to read a really short 6-line, 2-stanza poem called The Fog. It's called The
Fog.
Perfect. Claire, can you read it once to me? Because I know I always read once for flow before getting into the literal and deeper meaning. Claire?
The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over the harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on.
Perfect. And in poetry, Claire, what are my 2 genre-based thinking jobs?
What is the literal meaning? What is the deeper meaning?
What is the literal meaning and what is the deeper meaning? So I'm going to start just by naming the literal meaning. Let me start with these first 2 lines. The fog comes on little cat's feet. And I think to myself, what is specifically happening here? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and write LM. A fog is coming in. Next, I'm going to find the literal meaning of the next couple lines. It sits looking over the harbor on silent haunches. So I'm going to think to myself, okay, the literal meaning of that, that's pretty easy. The fog is sitting over the city. And then last, okay, and then moves on. So I know that's an easy literal meaning. The fog moves on. It leaves. Now, You can make a connection if you can pretty much always find the literal meaning of a poem. You all are great at that. But now we want to take it a step further, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can find the deeper meaning. I'm going to ask myself a couple of quick questions to help myself find the deeper meaning of this poem. The first thing I'm going to ask myself is, are there any powerful images that I see? Are there any powerful images? And then I'm going to ask myself, what emotions do those powerful images evoke? I see a first powerful image right here. The fog comes on little cat's feet. This is a powerful image. Let me think about, what feelings does that evoke? I can imagine the fog creeping in. It creates a little bit of a scary feeling. So I'm just going to write, the fog is creeping. I'm going to add sneaky here. It's making me feel like something creepy sneaky is happening. Next, I'm going to think about, is there another powerful image that I see in this poem? Oh yeah, it sits looking over the harbor and city on silent haunches. I can just imagine that, just like the fog sitting over the city. It makes me feel like a little bit nervous and worried. So I'm just going to go ahead and write nervous and worried. And there's one last powerful image that I saw, and then moves on. It's the last powerful image that I saw. As a reader, at first I was feeling creeped out and like a little bit like something sneaky was happening, and then I was nervous and worried that something bad was going on. But when it moves on, finally the emotion I'm feeling is relieved. So now I'm going to think about, okay, we have our literal meaning, and then we have our deeper meaning, the emotions that it creates. The last thing I'm going to think about is, what is the central message? What is this author trying to convey? I know the central message of this poem is that sometimes negative things creep into our lives slowly, and then they make us feel gloomy and nervous and worried, but later on they move on and we can feel relieved. So I'm going to pause there for a second. What steps did you all notice that I took to make sure that I named the deeper meaning and central message of this poem? Claire, what did you notice? What was the first thing I did?
To make sure you included the deeper meaning of the central message? Is that what you just asked?
What was, just go through it within my model, what was the first thing that I did?
Identified the literal meaning.
Right, pause there. So the first thing that I did is I identified the literal meaning. What was the second thing I did?
Identify the deeper meaning.
I identified the deeper meaning, but what questions did I ask myself?
You ask yourself, are there any powerful images that I see, and what are the emotions, feelings that
These images evoke.
Perfect. So I identified the literal meaning, I identified what are the powerful images, and then what feelings do those powerful images evoke? Last, what was the thing that I did?
Then you said the deeper meaning.
Yeah, I combined those feelings that I was feeling into a deeper meaning and wrote it out as a central message. Okay, so pause there. As you think about that, within that model, what were the key points?
You read once for flow.
Yeah.
You identified the GBT, but you have them identify the GBT plays. You found the literal meaning and you thought aloud the entire time so that students knew what you were doing and you annotated along the way. Then you moved on to the deeper meaning and you figured that out by answering those two questions of like, are there any powerful images that I see and what are the emotions, feelings that these evoke? But you like continue to think aloud so that students knew exactly what you were saying inside your head and why you chose it. And then you moved on to what is the central message.
Perfect. And you actually notice I made like a little bit of a mistake here. I named the deeper meaning, but wrote it as the central message. That's something we want to make sure we don't confuse. That's my fault. So as we think about it, this is really the deeper meaning, that sometimes negative things creep into our lives slowly, make you feel gloomy, and we can make us feel relieved. Our central message combines the literal and deeper meaning. Okay, so if we think about key points, we think about key points. These are the ones that we want to hit. What is the literal meaning of the poem? Just like the evening name. What is what powerful images do you see? How do those images make the reader feel? And last, what do those images and feelings teach us about the deeper meaning of the poem? That's also in those key points are in the document that I showed you. Okay, so here's the last thing that we're gonna do. So I'm gonna advise heavily that you model with the fog poem, which is listed in here.
Mhm.
Those 6 lines are nice, and it gives you a nice quick model to name. But then I'm gonna ask you what you want the student practice to be. And so there's actually 2 poems listed on here. One is, there's 4 poems listed. One is The Fog, one is Shadows, which we already used. The other 2 are either Maya Angelou's Still I Rise, or Stopping by the Woods on a snowy evening. Either can be good and used this way. Maya Angelou I like because it ties to the work we've been doing with African American history. She's also a great poet. Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, it mirrors more closely the ANET passage and what we've had students read. So I wanted to get your thoughts on which one you felt would be best to use.
Love my Angela, but
Also, sometimes, I feel like on reteach days, like it might need to be shorter.
Yeah,
Use
this
this one.
one's so
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay, so perfect. The last thing we're gonna end with, is just take a second and create a central message for this poem using our key points here. What'd you go?
So I was like walking through the little meaning, and you might still actually be confused about this one. But I was like, clearly there's a man living in like a house in the woods. The man like won't see him probably because he's not home. The horse is confused on why they're stopping because it's so like dark and late and cold outside. It's very quiet and very ominous. All you can hear is the wind and the snow falling. The speaker has something to do, but it's like he's miles away before he can get home and rest. And that even though it's cold and dark in the woods, the speaker still loves and enjoys the darkness and mysteriousness of the woods.
Interesting. Claire, where'd you go?
I wrote in my central message, sometimes it can be peaceful to be alone somewhere where it is completely quiet, but you must eventually move on to finish the things you have to do.
Very similar. So I had the central message of this poem is that although it is important to appreciate the beauty in nature, sometimes we're pulled away by the other tasks we must do. The author shows this by telling a story of a man who wants to appreciate a beautiful snowfall, but must head to town before night falls.
Appreciate, good word. I couldn't think of what he was feeling.
This one is kind of nice because the literal meaning is it's a little bit tricky, but it's not super difficult, I
Is
think.
it literally just like, I just put stops in the woods?
Yeah, a man
His
who
horse is
stops.
there.
Right, he stops. Right, exactly. I think it's just that like a man who wants to appreciate the beauty of the snowfall, but he needs to head back home. And remember that our central message, which I did a poor job modeling, merges both the deeper and literal meaning.
I just wrote central message too, it's deeper.
Right. Okay, I need to cut you all loose to go head back and support social studies. But I'm looking forward to this reteach on Friday, and I'll say like deeper central message of poetry, about as hard as it gets. So this is a nice place to push, and it'll be a nice place to show off their knowledge on it. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I share this, got a note and everything with you, so you should have it, and if you look at my comments on the side, it has all of our key points, the example, our central messages, all of those things. Alright, thank you all.